Are we streaming? Let's see. We are. All right, so we're going to pick up on number 20. That's where y'all stopped yesterday. So we're going to pick up with that one. I'm not sure exactly where we got to because I didn't write it on this paper, but we'll just start it from the beginning, okay? So here's what you've got. We know that we have an x here. We know we've got a y there. It doesn't matter what relationship these two angles have to make any difference. We can't make an equation that we can solve out of those two equations because we got two different variables, right? But we do have an x here. So we need to look at the relationship between this and this. What do we know about these two angles? What are they? Y'all got nothing? What are they, on the same side or alternate side of the transversal? Alternate. Are they interior or are they exterior? So they're alternate interior angles, right? What do we know about alternate interior angles? They are the same. That means we can set up an equation that says 8x minus 10 equals 7x. Right? And then we can solve that equation. So we're going to subtract 8x from both sides. Just like that. That leaves us with negative 10 equals negative 1x. And then we'll divide by negative 1. And x is 10. So that's one answer. X is 10. If you were putting this on an answer, an interactive worksheet, you would just type the number 10. It's not a degree, so you wouldn't put the degree symbol. It's just the value of the variable 10. I've hurt my arm somehow. I don't know what I've done. I woke up and it was hurting. Okay, now, we still got to find y. But now that we know x, can we find this angle? So what would we do to find that angle? And what's that going to give us? 70. So we know that this angle right here is 70 degrees, right? So if it's 70, what's the relationship between these two? They're supplementary. They're 180, aren't they? So can we find this angle since we know this angle is 70? So we would do 180 minus 70, right? And what's that going to give me? 110. So this angle right here is 110 degrees. So I know that 6y plus 20 equals 110 degrees, right? So now all I've got to do is solve this equation. So I'm going to subtract 20 from both sides. So I've got 6y equals 90. And then divide both sides by 6. And so what does that give me for y? So 6 goes into 9 one time, and I have 3 left over, so that's 30. How many times does 6 go into 30? 5, so that gives me 15, right? Y is 15. Okay, number 21. Now, one of my students' first hour, when they were working on their practice page, they got out a protractor and used a protractor. And number 21 is going to show you why you cannot do that, okay? You cannot get out a protractor and use a protractor to do these problems. Because, as with all of the work we do this year, these are not necessarily drawn to scale. You have to go by what the numbers are, not that you got to go by the information they gave you, not what it looks like, okay? So here we have an X, here we have an X, here we have a Y. So we're going to forget the Y for a few minutes. I'm even going to cover him up. We don't even need him for just a minute. Tell me what we know about those two angles that have the expressions with X in them. What do we know about those two angles? What relationship do they have? And I'll give you a hint. It starts with a C. What'd y'all say? They're not complementary. That would be add up to 90. But good try. That is at least a math word. It's a geometry math word, and it has to do with angles. So you come up with a good math word. What are they? They're in the same location. Starts with a C, ends with corresponding. Corresponding. Yeah, they're corresponding angles. And corresponding angles are the ones that are in the same spot. And that means that they're congruent to each other. They're the same angle, right? They're just in a different place. They're on a different line. That means that we can set this up so that 9x plus 21 equals 11x minus 1. And now we can solve that. So if we're going to solve that, we're going to subtract 9x from both sides. That's going to give us 21 equals 2x minus 1. Then we're going to add 1 to both sides. That's going to give me 22 equals 2x. Then what? What's our next step going to be? Divide by 2, right. So that gives me x is what? So that's my answer. It's not a degree. It's just a value for x. So my answer there is 11. Now, I still got to go back and find this y. But now that I know this value for x, I can plug that in for that x right there and do the math. So if I do 11 times 11 minus 1. What's 11 times 11? 121 times. 11 times 11 is 121. Minus 1. What is that? 120. So y'all, this angle is 120. That angle right there. Now I want y'all to look at that angle. Does that angle look like it's 120 degrees? No, that's an acute angle. Do you see why you can't use a protractor for these? They're not drawn to scale. The diagram is just there for reference. It's not meant to be exactly right. They just use these diagrams and then throw numbers in them and don't even check them to make sure they make sense. Okay? So you cannot use a protractor. But if that angle is 120, can we find this angle down here? What's that going to be? It's going to be 60 because they are a linear pair, right? So this equals 60. So 5y minus 5 equals 60. And now we can solve that. So we would add 5 to both sides. That gives me 5y equals 65, right? Then we're going to divide both sides by 5. So y equals 13, I think. Okay, so those are our answers. 13 and 11. Everybody good? All right, so let's look at 22 together. So on 22, I can't find 22. Where's it at? There we go. So on 22, here we have a y, here we have an x. We can't put them together. But here, they made this one easy for us. They just gave us a degree measure. So what do we know about these two angles right here? So if they're supplementary, aren't they? So if this one is 60, what's this one over here got to be? 120. And we get that by doing 180 minus 60 is 120. So this angle is 120, right? So we can set up an equation to say 4y plus 4 equals 120. And then we just solve that. So we would subtract the 4. So 4y equals 116, right? Now, I know 4 goes into 100 25 times. And 4 goes into 16 4 times. So if I put those together, that gets me what 4 goes into 116. So 25 and 4, 29. Right? Okay, what do I know about this 60 and this guy? What do I know about these two? What kind of angles are they? Alternate interior, right? Alternate interior. And that means what about them? So, these are congruent, right? So we're going to do 3x minus 3 equals 60. And then we're going to solve it. So we're going to add 3 to both sides. And we get 3x equals 63. Now I have to cut that out. Okay. divide by 3, and x is 21. Is that right? Y'all watch my math because y'all know I'm half crazy. So x is 21. Okay, we're going to do one more problem together. And I know y'all probably figured out there's no more on this side to do, right? So guess what that means? We did that. Y'all did that one yesterday. We're going to do number 9 on the other side together. Okay, it is funky looking, which is why we did it. So, look, their directions, they gave you a hint. They said, hint, draw an auxiliary line. You know what the problem with this hint is? Y'all don't know what an auxiliary line is. So, it'd be hard for y'all to know how to do it, right? So, an auxiliary line, this right here, auxiliary line, is a line that you draw that is not part of the diagram, but will help you solve the problem. That's what an auxiliary line is. So we are going to draw an auxiliary line right through this angle that's parallel with those other 2 lines. So you normally do these dotted, but if you want to do it solid, I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. But do y'all see how we drew that right there so that it is parallel to these other 2 lines? So what it winds up doing is it creates a set of lines or angles here and here that are congruent. Y'all see those angles where this transversal is going through? And then if you look at this other transversal, it creates a set of angles here and here that are congruent. All right? So instead of trying to figure out what one is as a whole, we're going to find its pieces. I'm going to put an X here, and I'm going to put a Y here. We're going to try to find the X and the Y angle, and then we'll just put them together. So if we look at this top part, and we ignore the bottom part for a minute, let me flip this over. If we look at the top part and we ignore the bottom part, what do we know about 50 and X right there? What kind of angles are they? They're corresponding, which means they are, what's the other C word? Congruent. So if that one's 50, this one is also 50, right? And then let's ignore the top for a minute and just look at the bottom. This angle that's 100 degrees and our Y angle, what do we know about those? They are not corresponding. But what are they? Consecutive, interior. They're on the same side and they're interior, which means they are starts with an S. What? Yes, they're supplementary. They add up to 180. So if Y plus 100 is 180, what does Y have to be? 80. And so how do we get that? 180 minus 100. That's how we got that, right? Now, look. We know this one's 50. We know that one's 80. If we put those together, what is 50 plus 80? $130. Y'all see it? Okay, I've got one more thing I need to talk to y'all about, and that is this diagram at the very top. Based on that diagram, y'all, what lines are parallel? M and N. How about R and S? Are they parallel based on the diagram? They're not. They didn't give us anything to say they're parallel. Is it possible they are? Yeah. But they didn't give us the information, so we can't assume they are. Now, what that means is that since M and N are parallel, then you can look at this group of angles as being corresponding to this group of angles. And you can look at this group of angles as being corresponding to this group of angles. But you cannot flip it like this. You can't say one is corresponding to 3 because R and T and S are not parallel. Do y'all see what I'm saying? Now, 1 and 3 are corresponding. They're just not congruent because T and S are not parallel. Y'all follow what I mean? They are in the same spot. They're just not congruent. The only way they're congruent is if the lines they're made from are parallel to each other. Y'all following me? Okay. All right. So y'all are going to work on this today and tomorrow. So you have 2 class periods. Well, 1 full class period and 1 half class period. There's no reason why you can't get this done. And if you get quarantined or you are absent, what do you have to do? Do your work, guys. You got to do your work. The whole purpose behind me giving you work to do is so you learn how to do this stuff. If you don't do your work, you're never going to learn how to do it. And then you're just going to fail your test. Okay? You got to do your work. Okay.